My stepmother stood up at my father's funeral and announced he had left her everything. Henry wanted me to share the news directly, she said. He felt his daughter would take it harder in private. 100 mourners turned to look at me. She did not know I had drafted his actual will 6 months earlier. I am a probate attorney. I had the real document in my purse. My name is Rachel Kerrigan. I am 42 years old, a probate attorney in Charleston, South Carolina, and for 15 years before I went out on my own, I worked at a small estate planning practice called Pearson Klein on Broad Street. I draft wills for a living. I have, by my best estimate, drafted somewhere over 2,000 of them in my career. I know what every clause does. I know which clauses get litigated and which clauses get respected. I know, because my father taught me this when I was 16 years old at his own dining room table, that the most important sentence in any will is the one that names the executor, and the second most important sentence is the one that no one in the family expects to be there. My father was Henry Kerrigan. He died of pancreatic cancer in March at the age of 71 in the hospice wing of Roper Hospital. He was, for 43 years, the founding partner of a firm called Kerrigan and Westbrook on Meeting Street, where he practiced primarily estate and trust law. He was the man who taught me to write a will. He was also, I will tell you, the man who taught me to read one carefully and to never sign anything for love when I could sign it for both love and clarity. My mother, Mary Kerrigan, died of breast cancer in October of 2013. I was 30 years old. My father was alone for 2.5 years. He met a woman named Vivian Hartwell at a charity gala in the spring of 2016. They were engaged within 9 months. They were married in November of 2016. I was a bridesmaid. I wore a green dress I have not put on since. Vivian Hartwell Kerrigan, as she has been known for the last 9 years, is 58 years old, has 3 sets of curls, and is the kind of woman who, when she meets a new acquaintance at a dinner party, finds a way within the first 8 minutes to mention that her late mother-in-law was a member of the South of Broad Garden Club. I want to tell you about Vivian, and I want to try to do it fairly, because the way I describe her is going to determine how you feel about my father, and I do not want my father to be misread. Vivian Hartwell, before she was Vivian Kerrigan, was a divorcee twice over with a small interior design business and a careful smile. She had grown up in Mount Pleasant. She had gone to the College of Charleston. She had married, at 23, a real estate developer named Roland Cunningham, from whom she was amicably divorced at 31. She had married, at 36, a cardiologist named Philip Hartwell, from whom she was less amicably divorced at 46. She kept his surname. She used both surnames in different rooms depending on the audience. She had, by the time she met my father, perfected a particular kind of social presentation that included a low-grade widow energy that was technically inaccurate, but emotionally effective. My father, who had been a real and recent widower, did not have the resistance to it that I, watching from across the room at that first charity gala, did. I want to tell you, before I tell you what Vivian did, that she made my father happy for about 3 years. He laughed at her stories. She traveled with him to Italy in 2018. She arranged the small dinner parties he had stopped having after my mother died. I am willing to give her on the record the 3 years she gave him. I have been giving them to her in my mind for the last 11 months. They were real. They mattered. The thing I am about to tell you does not erase them. It is, however, in a different category. My father's law firm, Kerrigan and Westbrook, was founded in 1984 with a man named Charles Westbrook. Charles is 68 now. He was my father's roommate at Wake Forest Law School in 1978. He has been the godfather to me since the morning I was baptized at St. Philip's Church in March of 1983. He held me at the font. He drove me to my first day of kindergarten when my parents were both on the same Tuesday in court. He took me to lunch every birthday from age 6 to age 21. He gave a toast at my wedding 8 years ago that made my father cry, in a way I had only seen him cry one other time. Charles Westbrook was, until the morning of my father's funeral, the second father figure in my life. Reader, I want you to remember Charles, because Charles is going to be important in this story in a way that I did not, until 6 months before my father's death, allow myself to understand. In late 2020, sometime around Thanksgiving, my father began to mention to me, in the offhand way he had of mentioning things he was actually paying close attention to, that the firm's books had been showing some small inconsistencies. He said it twice. He said it the second time on a Sunday afternoon in December while we were sitting on his back porch, and I asked him what he meant, and he changed the subject to a question about my daughter's school. I did not push. I should have pushed. In the summer of 2021, my father took an early retirement from active casework at the firm, though he stayed on as senior partner of record. He told me he was doing it because he wanted to spend more time with Vivian. He told me he was also doing it because his hip was bothering him. Both of these things were true. There was a third thing he was doing it for that he did not tell me. In the fall of 2024, my father called me on a Tuesday afternoon. He asked me to come to his office at the firm. He asked me to come at 6 in the evening after the other attorneys had left. I went. He poured me a small glass of bourbon, which I almost never drink. He poured himself a smaller one. He said, "Rachel, I'd like you to draft my new will. I'd like to do it together. I'd like to do it this week if possible." I said, "Dad, is everything okay?" He said, "Rachel, everything is what it has been for a while. I am ready to put it down on paper. Will you do this with me?" I said yes. We worked for 4 hours that night. We did not finish. We finished the following Saturday afternoon at his kitchen table while Vivian was at a charity luncheon at the yacht club. I want to tell you that I asked him 3 times during the drafting whether he wanted to talk about why he was doing this now and whether he wanted to talk about Vivian. He smiled at me each time. He said each time, Rachel, I'll tell you what I need to tell you, when I need to tell you. You are doing me a kindness by trusting that I have a reason. 3 weeks after we finished the will, I drove to my father's office without telling him I was coming. I went on a Saturday morning. I told the security guard at the lobby, a man named Curtis who has known me since I was 9, that I was just stopping in to grab something my father had left for me. Curtis let me up without checking. I went to the firm's records room. I pulled 3 things. I pulled the firm's general ledger for the previous 5 years. I pulled the engagement letters and consulting agreements file. I pulled the vendor payment history. I sat at my father's desk and I went through them for 4 hours. Reader, I want you to know what I found. In the order I found it, I found that the firm had a consulting agreement with a person named V. Hartwell Kerrigan, dated July 1st, 2021. The agreement paid Vivian a flat $40,000 a year for client development and relationship management services. There were no deliverables specified. There were no timesheets. There were no client referrals attributed to her in the firm's CRM. The agreement had been signed by my father and by Charles Westbrook. I found that the firm had reimbursed Charles Westbrook over the previous 4 years for 47 hotel stays in Atlanta, Savannah, Asheville, Charleston, and Hilton Head, all categorized as client business development. The hotel stays were each 2 or 3 nights. The receipts had been signed off on by Charles himself. The amounts totaled approximately $96,000. I sat with that data for about 20 minutes. Then I did the thing my father had taught me when I was 16 years old at his dining room table that I should always do when I suspect what I suspect. I cross-referenced. I went to Vivian's Instagram account, which I had not looked at in 2 years. I scrolled through her last 4 years of hosts. I matched one by one the dates of her travel photos against the dates of the hotel stays the firm had been reimbursing Charles for. They matched on 41 of the 47 trips. Vivian had been posting photos from Atlanta on weekends when Charles had been billing the firm for 2 nights at the Ritz-Carlton in Buckhead. She had been posting photos from a small inn in Asheville on the same weekend Charles had been billing 2 nights at that same inn. There was no overlap with any documented firm client business. There was no overlap with my father's calendar. There was, on 3 of those weekends, a notation in my father's personal calendar, which I had access to because I had drafted his power of attorney in 2019, that said, Vivian at her sister's in Beaufort. Vivian's sister had died in 2018. Vivian had no sister in Beaufort. I sat in my father's office at 6 o'clock on that Saturday evening with the documents on the desk in front of me, and I cried for about 10 minutes. Reader, I am going to be honest with you. I cried less for the affair, which I had begun to suspect a year earlier in a small private corner of my brain I had not yet let myself open. I cried for my father. I cried because I now understood why he had wanted me to draft a new will. I cried because I now understood that he had known for some period of time, and that he had not wanted to tell me, and that he was, at 71 years old, dying of pancreatic cancer that none of us, including him, would know about for another 2 months. I put the documents back. I locked the office. I went home. I did not call my father that night. I did not call him for 3 days. I needed 3 days. He gave me 3 days. When I finally called him on the following Wednesday at lunch, he picked up on the second ring and said, Rachel, you found it. I said, yes, Dad. He said, good. Now we are working from the same set of facts. I want you to know that you are not going to do anything about this until I am gone. Do you understand me? I said, yes, Dad. He said, Rachel, I have one more thing to ask you. I want you to be the keeper of this, not just the will, the whole of it. I want you to be the person who decides, when the time comes, how this gets handled. I am asking because you are the only person I trust to do it. Will you carry it for me? I said, yes, Dad, I will. He said, I love you, Rachel. I will see you on Friday. He hung up. We did not talk about it again until he was in hospice. My father's pancreatic cancer was diagnosed in late January. He had 3 months. He spent 6 weeks of those 3 months at home, and the final 5 weeks in the hospice wing at Roper. He died on a Wednesday morning at 5:47, with Vivian on his right hand and me on his left. During the 3 weeks before he died, I sat with him for 38 hours total, which I tracked because I track everything. He was lucid for about half of that. We talked about my mother. We talked about my daughter Sophie, who is 9. We talked about a fishing trip he had taken with his own father in 1963 to a lake in northern Minnesota that he had been telling me about, the same story, for 30 years. I had never gotten tired of the story. I do not now. In our final lucid conversation, which was on a Tuesday 3 days before he died, he asked Vivian if she would go down to the cafeteria and bring up some tea. She said of course. She left the room. My father waited until the door had closed all the way. He looked at me. He said, Rachel, after I'm gone, your stepmother is going to do something at the funeral. I do not know what it will be, but she will. She has been positioning for it for 9 years. Please be patient. Let her have her moment, then handle it the way you know how to handle it. I said, Dad, why are you letting her have a moment at all? He said, because she is going to have it whether I let her have it or not, and because she does not yet know that I know, and because, Rachel, the kindest thing I have left to do for her, after 9 years, is to let her believe for one afternoon that she got what she wanted. After that, you can do what you need to do. I have given her a moment. You can give her the rest. I said, Dad, do you want me to forgive her? He thought about it for a long moment. He said, no, Rachel, I want you to be precise. precise. Forgiveness is a separate question, and you do not have to answer it on a schedule. I want you to be precise about what she did and what your obligations are. Then, in your own time, you can decide what to do with the larger feeling. Vivian came back with the tea. My father drank 3 sips. He fell asleep. He did not wake up lucid again. In the 6 weeks between the cancer diagnosis and my father's death, I did several things very carefully. I asked my Uncle Edward to be the witness on the new will. Uncle Edward is my father's older brother. He is 75 years old. He was, until his retirement in 2022, a federal judge in the Eastern District of South Carolina. He is, in our family, the person you call when something cannot be talked about lightly. He read the will. He read the supporting documentation. He signed as witness. He hugged me for a long time in his living room in West Ashley. He said, "Rachel, your father is doing the right thing. So are you. I want you to know I will be in the second row at the funeral. I will be in the second row in every room where this has to be handled. I am not going anywhere." I asked a colleague of mine at Pearson Klein, a notary named Adam Park, to come to my father's house and notarize the will in my father's bedroom. Adam came. My father signed. Adam stamped. Uncle Edward witnessed. The will became, on a Sunday afternoon in February, a legally executed instrument. I put it in my office safe at Pearson Klein the next morning. I made 3 certified copies, which I distributed to 3 locations I will not specify here, in the way an attorney distributes anything that matters. I prepared, in the same month, what we call in the trade a sealed addendum. The addendum is a separate document that does not appear in the will itself, but that is referenced by the will and that may be requested by any party withstanding. The addendum contained the consulting agreement, the hotel reimbursement records, the date cross-reference with Vivian's Instagram, and a sworn statement from a woman named Tamara Lewis, who had been Charles Westbrook's executive assistant for 11 years and who, when I called her in January and asked her to come to my office, came and told me she had been waiting for a long time for someone in the Kerrigan family to call her, and signed a statement that documented 21 specifics incidents she had witnessed over 4 years. I will not tell you what is in those incidents. I want you to imagine the kind of incidents an executive assistant witnesses over 4 years when her boss is having an affair with the wife of his law partner. I will not write them down. I did not, in the 6 weeks before my father died, tell anyone what I had. I did not tell my husband. I did not tell my daughter, because she is 9 and because she should not have to know. I did not tell my closest friend. I did not particularly tell Vivian. Reader, I want to tell you that the hardest thing I have ever done in my professional career was sit at 3 Sunday dinners with Vivian in the 6 weeks before my father died, knowing what I knew and behaving the way I had been behaving for 9 years. She poured me wine. She asked about Sophie's school. She told me at the second of those dinners that she had been thinking about what kind of dress she would wear to the funeral when the time came. She had been thinking about it that early. I remember the exact moment I realized she had been thinking about it for longer than that. I excused myself to the powder room. I stood in there for about 3 minutes. I went back to the table. I drank my wine. My father's funeral was held at St. Philip's Episcopal Church on a Saturday morning in March. The same church where he had been baptized in 1954. The same church where I had been baptized in 1983. The same church where Charles Westbrook had held me at the font. There were 104 mourners. I had helped Vivian with the guest list, which she had told me she would handle, but which she had then forgotten about for 3 weeks until 2 weeks before the service. I had also helped her with the program, the flowers, the readings, and the catering for the reception at the firm's office on Meeting Street afterward. I had done all of this in a state of careful detachment that I now understand was what allowed me to do it at all. Vivian sat in the front row. I sat next to her. Uncle Edward sat in the second row directly behind us. Charles Westbrook sat in the third row, on the other side of the aisle. He had been one of the pallbearers. He had hugged me at the front of the church. He had told me how sorry he was. I had let him hug me. My father had asked me, 3 days before he died, to behave at the funeral exactly the way I had behaved for the previous 9 years. He had said, "Rachel, they are not yet to know that you know. Let them be in the room they think they're in. You can break the room when you're ready." The service was beautiful. The eulogies were brief and well prepared. The minister, Father Whitcomb, who had baptized me, spoke for 11 minutes about my father's love of fly fishing and his sense of humor and his work at the firm. There were 3 readings. There was the hymn my father had chosen, which was "Be Thou My Vision." There was a moment of silence, and then, at the very end of the service, before the recessional, Vivian stood up. Father Whitcomb had not invited her to speak. He looked surprised. He stepped aside the way a minister steps aside when a widow takes initiative at a funeral, which is to say with grace and confusion. Vivian walked to the front of the church. She turned to face the mourners. She had not, I will tell you, prepared this. She had improvised it. I could see it in the way she touched her pearls before she spoke. She had thought she was going to say a few words of thanks. Something had changed her mind in the previous hour. She said, "Friends, family, I wanted to take a moment before we move to the reception to share a piece of news that I think Henry would have wanted you all to hear from me directly. As many of you know, Henry and I have been married for 9 years. We were soulmates in a way that, with all respect to his first marriage, I think he had not experienced before. In his final weeks, he made certain decisions about his estate that I think reflect the depth of our connection. He has left me his entire estate. He wanted me to share this directly because he felt his daughter might take it harder in private than in public. I hope, in time, Rachel and I can heal together. Thank you all for being here today." She did not look at me while she said it. She looked at the rear of the church. 104 mourners turned, slowly, in the pews, to look at me. I sat for about 4 seconds. Then I stood up. I walked to the front of the church. Father Whitcomb stepped aside again. I stopped at the pulpit. I had the manila envelope in my hand. I did not open it. I did not need to open it. I had memorized the 3 sentences I was going to say in the shower that morning. I said, "Thank you, Vivian. I'd like to clarify 3 things for the room before the reception. The first is that my father asked me to draft his actual will 6 months ago. The document Vivian is referring to was Dad's previous will, drafted in 2017. He revoked it in February. The current will was witnessed by my uncle Edward Kerrigan, who is in the second row, and notarized by a colleague of mine at Pierce and Klein. It is, under South Carolina law, the operative document." I let that sit for 2 seconds. Vivian had stopped touching her pearls. I said, "The second is that I have a copy of the will with me. I am not going to read the entire document here because that would not be appropriate at a funeral. I will say only that my father's stated wishes are different from the description Vivian just provided. Anyone withstanding to receive a copy of the will may request one from my office on Monday morning." I let that sit for 3 seconds. Vivian had taken 1 step backward toward the front pew. I said, "The third is that my father's will references a sealed addendum that documents the basis for certain of his decisions. That addendum is available by law to any party with proper standing. Mr. Charles Westbrook, who is sitting in the third row, will receive his copy on Monday morning. Vivian, your copy will be delivered to your attorney as soon as you retain one. I would recommend that you retain one." Uncle Edward stood up in the second row. He walked to the front of the church. He offered me his arm. I took it. We walked back to our pew together. I sat down. The recessional began. Vivian did not come to the reception at the firm's office. She did not, for that matter, come home that night. She stayed with her former neighbor, a woman named Helen Whitfield, who I have never particularly liked. She retained an attorney named James Garner the following Wednesday. James Garner called my office on Thursday morning. He asked for a copy of the will and the sealed addendum. I sent them to him by courier within the hour. He called me back on Friday at 4 in the afternoon. He said very politely, "Ms. Kerrigan, I have read the documents. I will be advising my client to accept the elective share under South Carolina Code Section 62-2-202. I will not be contesting the will. I would appreciate it if we could conclude this matter without a hearing." I said, "Mr. Garner, that is acceptable to me. Please have your client sign the standard waiver by close of business Monday." Vivian received approximately $407,000 under the South Carolina elective share statute, which is the minimum that a surviving spouse may receive over a will's objection. She had been expecting, based on the 2017 will, to receive my father's entire estate, which was worth approximately $4.1 million. She received roughly 10% of what she had been expecting. She did not contest. The addendum, I am told, was persuasive. Charles Westbrook was a different matter. The sealed addendum, when delivered to him on Monday morning, accompanied a forensic audit referral to the South Carolina bar that I had filed on Sunday afternoon, as well as a separate report to the firm's professional liability insurer. The forensic audit, conducted by Bradley and Pierce over the following 90 days, found that Charles had been billing the firm for approximately $1.1 million in unsubstantiated client business development expenses over 4 years, much of which appeared to overlap with Vivian's travel schedule. The South Carolina bar suspended Charles's license in July. He surrendered it permanently in October. The firm, what was left of it, dissolved by mutual agreement in November. Vivian and Charles did not, as far as I am aware, end up together. He blamed her for the destruction of his career. She blamed him for the destruction of her marriage. Neither of them blamed themselves. Vivian moved to Beaufort, where she is currently living in a smaller house than the one she had with my father. Charles moved to Atlanta. He has by all accounts been very quiet since. I inherited my father's interest in the firm and dissolved it formally in December. I kept 3 of his longtime paralegals on at my own practice, which I have rebranded as Kerrigan and Associates, and which now operates out of the same office on Broad Street where I have been working for the last 8 years. I have, in the past 11 months, drafted 411 wills. I am, in a quiet way that I would not have predicted, doing the best work of my career. Uncle Edward, who is 75 and a retired federal judge, and who has been the steadiest presence in my family for 60 years, has dinner with me every Tuesday. He tells me stories about my father at 25 that I had not heard before. He tells me what my mother was like in 1979, when he first met her. He is, in a way that I am, slowly, allowing myself to recognize a man who has been waiting his entire life for me to need an uncle. I am slowly allowing myself to be the niece he has been waiting for. My 9-year-old daughter Sophie asks me every so often when she is going to see Grandma Vivian again. I have told her that Grandma Vivian is taking some time and that she will see her when the time is right. Sophie has not, in 11 months, asked a follow-up question. I am grateful for that, and I am also aware that the follow-up question is coming, and that I will need to be ready when it does. I do not yet know what I am going to say. I have, on Uncle Edward's advice, decided to wait until she asks. There is a man in the suite next to mine, an estate planning attorney named Owen Park, who has been bringing me coffee on Tuesday mornings since June. He does not stay. He does not ask me to lunch. He brings the coffee, says good morning, and goes back to his office. I am slowly learning to receive coffee. That is the work I am doing doing in the corner of my life I had not yet built a room for. There is a particular gift in being asked by a parent to be the keeper of their final wish. There is a different gift in being trusted to wait, calmly, while someone else takes the microphone to lie about what your parent wanted. My father gave me both gifts. I have been thinking about them for a long time. I do not know yet which one was harder. I do not know yet which one was kinder. Reader, I want to ask you something. Has someone in your family ever been entrusted with a truth they were asked to keep until exactly the right moment? Has a parent ever asked you to wait in a room with people lying about them until the moment when the lie could be unsaid? Tell me below. I will be reading.